speaker series event with Baltimore-based artists Webster Phillips and Rasan Hammond and Jeffrey Kent. I'm Terry Henderson. I'm your co-host for tonight, along with Jeffrey Kent. I'm the Connect+Collect gallery coordinator, as well as a staff writer for Be More Art. And our co-host Jeffrey is our director of outreach and promotion.
Good evening, Terry. Good evening, Webster and Rasan and everyone. Thank you for joining us. You know, I'd like to start off before we get really involved in our conversation with a moment of silence. Excuse me for shaking my camera there. Sorry about that. I'd like to start off with a moment of silence for two of Baltimore artistic and cultural icons, as well as members of the Micah family. First, of course, is Fletcher Mackey, who transitioned earlier this year, and most recently, one of my mentors, Raul Middleman, who was really close with our two guests this evening. I'd like to start with a moment of silence. We'll just. Thank you very much for that, Terry, and everyone this evening. Back to you, Terry.
Thank you, Jeffrey. So thank you all for joining us tonight for this virtual conversation with artist archivist Webster Phillips and his collaborator and curator Rasan Hammond for our discussion of Roots Need Water. Roots Need Water is an exhibition of historic photographs by I. Henry Phillips Sr., which is currently on view at Connect+Collect and through Saturday. And with today's conversation, our hope is that you'll learn more about the I. Henry Photo Project and Webster's ongoing documentation of quotidian Black American experiences through his grandfather's historic photographs. And in doing this, he's challenging the status quo through art and culture and building a collective and inclusive Baltimore archive. So one very important news item that I have to say is that the 12th edition of Be More Art's print journal is nearly available. So you can subscribe through our website or purchase from a Baltimore bookseller once it becomes available. And we hope that you'll subscribe to Be More Art's print journal and recommend it to others. And it's awesome because the Webster's project was in issue 8 and it was written by Nora Khan, if I got her last name correct. It's currently available online on our website. If you go to our website, bemoreart.com, you'll be able to access that article. So tonight we're using a webinar format. That means you're welcome to say hello, share your comments, thumbs up in our Q&A chat. And with that feature, so I'll be periodically checking it and asking them questions. And at the end, we'll also take a break to ask questions. So I'll do my best to answer you guys in real time, but I'm also gonna be going through a slideshow as well. Hi, Leslie. Rasan, your mom says hi. So I am now going to, so bring up a slideshow of some work and also talk while I'm doing so. So bear with me one moment. I'm gonna share my screen. Let's see. Share screen. So can y'all see that now?
Yes.
Awesome. Mm-hmm. All right. So let me get into it. So tonight, again, we have the pleasure of speaking with Webster Phillips and sorry, all technical difficulty, and Rasan Hammond. They are lifelong collaborators and friends, and their most recent endeavor was the Roots Need Water show at Connect+Collect gallery, which is currently on view. So about Webster, so he has worked as a high school photography teacher and in the article in Be More Art noted the gaps in education about African-American history. And it was quoted as saying that while both his father and grandfather photographed figures and celebrities passing through town, they also documented daily life for Black Baltimoreans, the unknown figures that Webster wants to uncover. Given the historic erasure of Black communities, Webster is using the lens. I'm so sorry, y'all, my computer is having a moment. My apologies. Joining Webster is Rasan Hammond, a Baltimore native and collector who has been supporting the I. Henry Photo Project for over 2 decades. He's a videographer with credits for Disney, ESPN, the NAACP, and the 2017 Tupac biopic, All Eyes on Me. His keen eye brought together the family portrait images for the Roots Need Water exhibition featured currently at Connect+Collect. So if you don't know about the I. Henry Photo Project, I am just gonna read a couple of lines about it before we get into the conversation with Jeffrey and Rasan and Webster. So Mr. Phillips Sr. illustrated life in the Baltimore community, telling stories about people of celebrity and the joys and tribulations of the working class. His work includes tens of thousands of images documenting the history of Baltimore, as well as the nation at large. In his collection, documented photographs over 3 decades, he has captured American history, culture, entertainment, sports, government, and politics, shot from the perspective of the African American community. And his photographs celebrate the richness and diversity of the African American community while capturing traditions and mores of the time. The I. Henry Photo Project focuses on identifying unknown people and places in Mr. Phillips' work, which we'll talk a bit about later, preserving history and making it available for educational purposes. They aim to bridge the gap between the elders in their community and the youth by involving students in the identification process. So, Jeffrey, do you want to begin?
Yes, thank you for that, Terry. Were you about to say? Okay. So thank you again for that introduction. A couple of things I like to also mention is that the Connect and Collect Gallery is exhibiting this work, and it will be closing soon. So you can visit the gallery without an appointment, I understand. And just to be you have to be masked, wear a mask, and you can enter the gallery and see this exhibition. Let me start with you, Webster, to ask you a quick question about the history of the project and how this archive of Black Baltimore came about.
So my grandfather and my father and grandfather were both photographers as well as myself. My grandfather shot for the Afro newspaper, which was a national daily newspaper back in the day. It's actually the longest running Black newspaper in America. They actually are still in print. I think they're weekly now. I think it comes out on Wednesdays. He shot for the Afro for a little more than a decade. And during that time, covered everything from Negro Leagues to Jazz on the Avenue to, the guy at the gas station, the guy on the motorcycle, a little bit of everything. He did a lot of freelance work, shot in a lot of churches, also did a lot of family portraits. And that's kind of how, when Rasan and I was kind of narrowing things down for this show, we kind of dug into those family portraits, which you'll kind of see a few of those in this slideshow. But maybe about, I always knew that he had a large collection of photographs, but I was more familiar with 35 millimeter format and the 120 like medium format photos. And one day, just kind of looking around the house, I ran into a box of 4x5 negatives, which I had never seen before. So kind of diving into those, and this is 1994. So, the only way that you could really see the images was to either put them on a light box or to actually print them. So we began to kind of dig through the negatives. My father, my cousin and I, and actually a buddy of mine, Sean Barron, went through a lot of those photos and just kind of categorized them. And we would print a few here and there. And then maybe around early 2000s, I was able to grab a scanner and start to digitize some of these negatives. Maybe I might have had maybe about 200-300 negatives scanned. And I was teaching at Baltimore Talent High School, Baltimore Talent Development, teaching photography there. And the history teacher there, a buddy of mine, Gerald Baker, had gave these students an assignment to interview the elders in their families and come back with stories about the neighborhood and about this time period. And Gerald kind of was scouring these archives, libraries. He was, going all around the state trying to find these images. And he was having a hard time finding images to back up these stories and to give the kids a view and kind of put a picture behind these stories that they had. And I let them know that I had these images. And when the kids saw the images, their reaction is really, amongst other things, people always telling me, man, you got to do something with this collect, you got to do something with these images. But what really jump started and kind of lit the fire under me was seeing these kids' reaction to the images. Wow. And so that's why we try to kind of have a focus on making the kids making students a part of this ID process. So we do everything from go to senior centers, go to retirement communities. We meet with small groups of elders. We Zoom with folks and kind of pull up the archive, and I'll kind of hit on people's areas of expertise. So if someone was maybe a teacher, I might pull up education photos. I might put up school photos, see if they recognize someone. If someone was into the jazz scene, I'll pull up some club shots and pull up some images. So we kind of tailor the ID sessions to people's areas of expertise, and it always turns into kind of a trip down memory lane for everyone. And we usually end up with a nice handful of IDs from every session. We also post images on Facebook and Instagram, and maybe about 1 out of every 5 images we post, someone recognizes someone in the images.
Wow.
And it's a time sensitive thing. Like these people that from this time period, they know these images aren't gonna be around forever. So it's really right now is the time, you know, to get out there and kind of you know, jump into everyone's sphere and really get as many eyes on these images as possible, with the hopes that maybe in the next year or two, we'll be putting a large amount of these images online as a resource for educators, for teachers, for whoever has an interest in our history. But at the same time, I didn't want to just put the images up without enough historical information to tell the story around these images. So eventually you just be able to go online and kind of do your own ID session. Like I always encourage people to, if you're at Thanksgiving dinner, if you're at a family gathering, pull out your phone, pull out your iPad, and just social images from Facebook or Instagram to the elders in the family. And if nothing else, you'll get a whole bunch of stories about the times. Even if anybody doesn't recognize anybody, you're always going to get a good story about the cars or the clothes or, you know, like this image right here. A lot of the family portraits were always centered around, usually in the living room, but always was centered around the radio, the TV. If someone was TV as it just came out, it was a big thing to have the tube in the house. If someone was piano player, there's an image of a family in front of the piano in the gallery. So people kind of used to gather around like the focal point of the house and something that was personal to families. Also, just going into people's homes is so personal, and taking family portraits. A lot of times people now, they want to go to a park or they want to go to, you know, some spot with a cool background. But I try to encourage people to take a family portrait in a house where, you know, 5-10 years from now, there's a new addition to the family. You might have moved across town. You might have moved out of state. You might be in a different house. To try to really personalize these family portraits. And that's something that really jumped out at us when we were searching through the images.
You know, one of the things that I'm finding very interesting while looking at these images is for me, it's profound. And the fact that I know a lot of painters, you know, today, a lot of my peers are painters, are really great painters. And a lot of them, their main focus and why they paint the way they do is because they want children and people to see images of Black folks doing things like they are in these portraits. And it's just interesting that these are portraits from decades ago that have these images that now a lot of painters are trying to paint. You know, and it's like it's really the most popular type of art made by a Black artist right now, the images that are very similar to these photos that your grandfather captured. And it's really, really remarkable, I must say, no doubt. So tell us how you and Rasan got to collaborate, and tell us a little bit about that. So let me hear from Rasan though. Let me hear his version.
Yeah. Well, I'll say, you know, we've been pretty much collaborating our entire lives. I've known Irvin since really he's my oldest childhood friend. Now that I think about it, I mean, we grew up on the same block, a few doors up the street, And we're only, I think, about 6 or 7 months apart in age. So, I mean, our parents grew up, as, just together. And so like we were, like Bert and Ernie kind of thing. We were just inseparable. And so, as we grew up, we grew up around these, his dad, who obviously was a photographer and took us everywhere on his jobs around the city. And would just, was very, very passionate about educating us on, I would just say, life in general. He was always never one to hold back information, and always teaching and always telling. And so it was awesome to get all these experiences. And also just, we probably didn't realize how fortunate we were at the time to just be able to absorb any of that and see what we got going on. But it definitely lended to us growing a relationship as far as working together, because we just been doing it for so long and just so many different mediums in our life. And this is kind of like a new endeavor for us as far as a gallery show. So when he approached me with it, it wasn't that really difficult for us to hatch out how to get through the process, because we know each other so well and work together on so many different various products. So, it's refreshing to try something new. And I've been, for the longest time, wanting to, express myself through his work a little bit, and through his grandfather's works, because he's always had such a library of photos and information for us to really pick through and make happen. Is everybody there? My phone. Okay. I wasn't sure I was.
Yeah, you're good.
Okay, cool.
And so you mentioned that you scanned almost 10,000 of these negatives so far. Tell us a little bit about how you got into scanning, first of all, to even get to think about doing this, and how it's benefited you in archiving your grandfather's work. That's you, Webster. You might be muted. I'm not sure.
Oh yeah, you're muted, bro.
I was muted. Got it. So slightly after when we did that project with the kids in the school, technology, kind of hit a little bit more, and I was able to get a scanner that was way less time consuming than my original scanner. And I kind of just started with the files, and kind of just went through the files, and just basically spent 2 or 3 years just scanning negatives 2 at a time, all day, every day, until I got to 10,000. And then I kind of doubled back to try to start to identify a lot of images. Only maybe about a quarter of the images were labeled, or I could recognize, or my father could recognize off the top who was in the images, especially before they were positive. So periodically I'll link up with my dad or one of my aunts, who my Aunt Laura, who's definitely like a mover and a shaker, and from that time, and knows everyone all over the city. And we'll kind of just run through images, trying to kind of put a dent on the archive. But it's really like it's hard. It's hard to describe sometimes. I try to compare it to, imagine going back and looking at your grandfather's Instagram or your grandmother's Instagram or Facebook. Like right now, we're the first generation where our kids and grandkids are really going to have a comprehensive look, something besides a family portrait or maybe a graduation. Every once in a while, there's always a photographer in the family, and someone who kind of is the archivist and someone who documents the occasions. But to really look back and really see life through his eyes, it's something it's powerful to see it. And like I tell people now, it's like everyone's Instagram is kind of like their it's an archive.
Yeah. But this is magical. That's the word I would use, by the way, just to interrupt you for a second. It is really magical.
Yeah, it's definitely I'm definitely fortunate to be able to kind of look at all these things and actually see the parties, you know, pictures of my uncle shooting dice in the kitchen. You know, people sleep at the bar, people you know, the guy on the way home and who just caught a big rockfish, or you know, the guy at the gas station, and really having a look into those times, um, and just trying to get as many eyes on the images as possible.
One of the things I was thinking as I'm looking at this, and when I was also thinking about the painters that do these paintings, I think this is a museum exhibition. I mean, many museum exhibitions, as a matter of fact. I think that it just needs to be written about more. And I'm glad that we're having this conversation today because these works are really magnificent. So the prints that are in the exhibition, I want to talk about that for a second.
Okay.
So I believe we have one wall that has the smaller works that are both horizontal and vertical that are available. And those are, I believe, are limited editions because you did those in the dark room. So we want to talk a little bit about that. And then we have another wall that are some larger prints that are open edition. They're not limited edition. And they're family portraits, if my memory serves me correctly.
Correct.
And then we have a print of the swimming pool that Queen Joyce Scott did an artwork of that's at Drew Hill Park, and you actually have that, and that's an actual photograph that your grandfather printed, I believe.
That one actually was an image that I took just before I shot that 35 millimeter, just before she did that installation.
Oh, I didn't know that. That's yours.
Yeah, that's
wow.
From like late 90s.
The way you developed it is really amazing. We're gonna have to have more conversation about that then. I wish we had a shot of that to share with the audience. And
Saturday 12 to 4 and come see it in person.
That sounds smart. That sounds smart.
By the way, that's a beautifully hung show, by the way. I really like the way it looks in the gallery. So
that's awesome.
Props to
that's awesome.
Everybody putting that together.
That's Terry. That's Terry's vision, no doubt.
No,
and
that was
it came together very nice.
It was Webster. That's
it
what
was. It was a great collaborative team effort. But I have a question. I'm curious, like, since y'all have been friends forever, and I have been looking at these images a lot for the past couple of months. I'm just curious, what are some of your personal favorites out of the archive in general, maybe, or any that might be in the slideshow? Are there any that jump out at you?
This one right here that you just went past with the three guys.
This one
is one of the most interesting shots. There are some shots of people hunting. There's some shots of police officers. There's some shots with people. But if you notice, the guy on the right has a pistol. The guy on the left has a knife.
Oh, shit. I didn't even notice.
And the guy in the middle is doing his "Can't we all just get along?" Yeah. But I always say my grandfather must have made the guy on the right run around the block a couple times because he's sweating profusely. Yeah. And the other guys are super cool. But a lot of the images, he shot a lot of candids, and he also shot a lot of stage photos or pose photos. But he would set up a shot, but then he always would say something interesting or say something a little wild to maybe get a reaction out of someone, or wait until they kind of do something natural once he has the shot set up. It's like, this is a time where with this camera, if you go to a job or you go to take someone's family portraits, you might only have three negatives, three slides of film to get the shot that you need. So each one really had to count. And in these times, a lot of people really didn't have opportunities to get really professional photos of themselves, you know? So you see a lot of shots that are where you can kind of see it's a news event and maybe this would go in the newspaper. But then you also see a lot of shots where it was just something that interested him. And, you know, it might have went to the person in the photo, but one of his big things was going up on the second floor in the back of people's houses and taking shots out of that back window of just the backyards, clotheslines and alleys and these type of things that you knew he had a vision for where a lot of these images would go, aside from the newspaper and a lot of the freelance work.
Wow. That's a
So one
curator's
thing I wanted
dream.
to say, is, you know, Uncle Irvin was very big. Uncle Irvin's dad, but so one thing he was really big on, he would always preach to us is like, you know, he would say that he could freeze time, and that's kind of really what these photos really encapsulate, and it really does tell a story of history in a sense where, you know, you can see the difference between now and then, and it really becomes down to the details where you just said, like, you didn't even notice that guy had a knife in that photo,
Sure
or that guy
didn't.
had a gun.
Never
And you know,
noticed it.
to answer your question, Terry, one of my favorite photos is a family portrait on the wall of family, and they're huddled around a little box, and it looks like it was like a giveaway, it was a donation. And you know, one thing that people escape to notice in there is that the little girl in her hand is holding an animal, and you know, you would think it's like a dog or something, but it's not. If you look closely, she's holding a wombat, which is, you know, obviously very strange. And you know, who, you know, like, I don't know if people have wombats as pets now. I Googled it because
Where is it?
I looked
I don't
it up.
see that
Apparently
print.
they are, you know,
It's not in the set.
domesticated
it's
a
in the
little
gallery.
bit, but this is not the norm. And you know, it was just one of those things where it's like, is she holding a wombat? Like, that's so odd to me. But
I don't even know what
maybe
that
that's
is.
something that only, you know, you could find wombats in 1940. I'm not exactly sure, but you know, to answer your question, that's one of my favorite photos, and it's a talking piece. But you know, all those photos hold little gems of history in there where it's like, what was going on at this time that they had this, or you know, were they, you know, it's saying we don't do it now, is all I'm saying. So
So give us a, I'm sorry, go ahead, Terry.
It's a thank you.
I'm gonna give a shout out to, real quick, I'm gonna give a shout out to Lowry, because it took me years to figure out what that animal was. But Larry had a great point when she came to the opening, and she was saying maybe because they're native to Australia, a merchant seaman or someone must have brought that animal back and brought that animal over here, because you're not finding them in the wild, you know, like you're not just gonna run across. They're not native to here, and I was always wondering how did she get a hold of this animal? And the Afro used to do a lot of stuff, a lot of charity work and a lot of things, like family was in need. They have a big box and they're taking out coats. It looks like maybe a one-room house. There's a wood stove. There's a bed folded up kind of in the background, and they're kind of pulling what looks like donations out of the box. And this is also a big part of the project is I'm not exactly sure what's going on in this photo. So it's like all you can do is speculate, and that's why this ID process is such a huge thing. Like even with the swimming images, Cars Beach was a big staple. It was the Black Beach. It was privately owned. Towards the end of it, Willie Adams, who was someone who financed a lot of businesses in the community, was co-owner of Park Sausages, not mistaken, and funded a lot of businesses in the community because it was nearly impossible to get a loan, to get your distribution, to get all these things back then. And a lot of those images, I like to say they were Cars Beach, but because there were a few different options, until someone gives you an exact, you know, maybe one or two people a lot of times to even double back on it. I know some of the images are the Druid Hill Y. I know a lot of the images are the colored pool, which is pool number 2. There's a few images of the pool actually that's still there now. There's a great image of a young kid on a bike kind of looking in to that pool now during segregation, and kind of seeing these images and getting to the point where for a majority of them, we don't have to speculate. You know, we really have the history and we can really tell the story. Someone was talking to me about a lot of times, if I wouldn't have went into photography, a lot of these images would have went to a museum or went to a historical society where, you know, they archive them, they do a show, and a lot of times these images sit and the story's not being told. They're not accessible to people. There's not a conversation around them. The kids aren't able to see them. The educators aren't able to see them. And this history is important because like people, there's a lot of conversation now about controlling the narrative and really being able to tell our story. It's his story, but really to be able to have kind of the proof is in the pudding kind of thing. Like really be able to look at a photo of a guy like Dr. Camper, who was good friends with Paul Robeson, and after doing some research on him, found out he was instrumental in politics and rallying the vote. Victorine Adams, who was the first, I don't know if she was the first Black councilman, the first woman, I'm pretty sure, on the city council, and the women's groups that she put together that were rallying votes. And these conversations now, you see Black Girls Vote, which one of my cousins is a part of, and seeing these things and kind of seeing the origins of a lot of these things, and kind of to bridge the gap and to kind of put the old with the new. And there are a lot of things are different, but a lot of things stay the same. A lot of these things now is reoccurring themes that you'll see these days that you do see back then.
So you had mentioned your own photography a moment ago. We have a question. I wanted to get one in here from Barbara Wilkes. Hope I said your name right, Barbara. She says, for Webster, after so many years of archiving this body of work, how do you find it informs your own photography?
It's interesting. I would say one of the biggest things I learned from my grandfather and father is that they both took their cameras with them everywhere they went. And I see a lot of similarities in our styles. Also a lot of differences just because of the technology and the times. But a big influence, especially around the third or fourth day of printing in the darkroom, those 5x7s of the swimming images, it really hit me that every time my grandfather had every picture that went out to someone, he had to go through this same process that I was going through. And I really felt like at that 34th day, I really felt like he was in there with me. And I'm a big I try to push all photographers now to print photos. Print the photos, get them up on the walls. A lot of photographers now, they're taking great photos online. They have great eyes. You do a job, you do a gig, and people just want the images to put online. But I'm trying to encourage people, not even exhibitions and shows aside, print the pictures out, give them to people. So there's a difference when the photo is actually up and you live in the space with the image. And you walk by it every day in the hallway when you're going downstairs, or when you go in the kitchen, you see this image, or when you're in the living room, you're actually living. It becomes tangible. It becomes a living thing. A lot of times people see a photo, you swipe it, double tap it, and then that's it. Oh, this is a great image. But then it doesn't disappear because it's always kind of there on the archive. But to actually have the image and live with it, I would say, even stylistically aside, probably the biggest, one of the biggest influences and things just from that old school of photography is just me just really wanting to print as many photos as possible and get them in people's hands so that they're really living with the images. And really just stopping the moment, like really just capturing the moment, and kind of just recording the times,
Hey, Basama, let me ask you, what was the most difficult part of selecting these images, looking through them, etc.?
Well, I mean, really, the hardest part was coming up with what we wanted to do, because, I grew up with these photos as well. I mean, I knew, about these things, way before they were ever digitized or scanned or anything. I mean, they were just in boxes, and we would be moving these boxes from the garage to the third floor to the second floor. And as we were kids, we used to go through, the room, and we would be playing, with all these photos and stuff. So we're very familiar for it. But as far as coming up with what to do, we had to figure out what we wanted to showcase, because he's got such a large library, and we could have gone in any direction. So really honing in on what we wanted the show to be about. And we kind of settled in on the family theme. And then the water theme, we couldn't kind of get away from it just because it's such a taboo in the African American community that we don't swim. And having so many images that we kept coming across, we were like, we got to do something with this, because like this is, you just don't see it, you know. And so we were like, we have to shed light on this, so it has to be a part of it. And so we kept coming back to that and the family theme. And so we just kind of ran in that direction, and then it was much easier for us, because I mean, like I said, he's got such a library of stuff. We could have started anyway. We could have flipped a coin or threw darts at a board. You know what I mean? He really does have a large collection to kind of go through and hone down. So, I mean, it was fun for us to kind of hatch out what we wanted to do in the first place.
Got it. These photos were taken mostly between what period?
Mostly in between the early 40s to the mid 60s.
Okay.
Mostly, and actually the photo, if you look at the animal on the left, the wombat.
Ah,
On the
wow,
little girl on the
I see it.
I don't know if you can zoom in on it.
Yeah, I see that.
But even just to kind of hit on what Rasan was saying, like we were looking at the water thing, and I had a ton of images. I wanted to really just show Black people's proximity to water, and just kind of start that conversation. It's a long history with like, it's almost crazy to hit on. When you look at the numbers, I think something recently, I think I saw a statistic that said that 70% of kids under 21 said that they either couldn't swim or weren't strong swimmers. And when you look back and you see in the early century, there was a pool boom. And a little bit later, there was thousands of pools were being put up around the communities. They became segregated. And then actually, which is also crazy, is when the pools became integrated, a lot of the white folks just stopped swimming. There was a big private pool boom. And the more affluent folks went to the private pools because they didn't want to swim with the Black folks. And so the poor and middle class white folks actually stopped swimming. And you see the statistics where that drops off because they just didn't want to swim with the Black folks. So it was almost like cutting off the nose, spite the face, which was like, rather than swim with the Black folks, they denied themselves of swimming. And so it's a huge story now. And it's always one of those things, like there's always a little bit of truth to, you know, some of these things of Black folks not swimming, but we kind of just wanted to let the photos speak for themselves and just kind of start the conversation. And we were kind of going in between Black businesses and Black family, and Black family kind of just hit quicker on the go along with these swimming images because it has that family feel. And I'm very close to the images. I'm all over which ones, and Rasan is a decisive cat. So I knew it was like, asking him to come in on the project, he narrowed down a list that would have took me months to narrow down. And then we kind of chopped his couple dozen photos that he narrowed in on. And then we ended up with those 10 that are in the show. This is actually a great shot. This is actually in the show. And if you look on the left, you kind of see the monstera that everyone is, all the plant folks now are growing. If you have a green thumb, you might have took on a monstera. But even down to the dress she's wearing, down to the lamp, down to the
yard, man,
the yard, the Adirondack chair, you know, the dog, you know, the bamboo lounge chair. A lot of times they would show like this both the whites divorced, which is like now you can go thanks to a lot of work that folks like Savvy are doing and the project that they did, archiving Afro stuff. If you have a library card, you can go online and actually look up these newspapers. And that was a way of dating a photograph back then. You see a lot of photos with people holding up the newspaper to kind of date the image and give it a time, you know?
Yeah, so I know when we were talking yesterday, Webster, you were kind of talking about how Rasan was kind of the person that kind of pushed you to digitize the images?
So along with it's a combination of things. The kids really lit the fire under me, but Rasan was one of those people that was always, it was a nice handful of folks that just like, yo, this is historic. This is us. This is something that you gotta get behind this. You gotta kind of double down. And that's when I kind of just sat back, pretty much dropped everything I was doing. And for 2 or 3 years, just sat in the office and scanned photos. But he was definitely somebody that from the beginning, when I started printing, was one of those people that, yo, I need a print of that. I need to get that frame.
Even not to cut you off, but even more so before that, I mean, like I said, like I remember growing up, you just there were rooms full of pictures and boxes, just pictures and pictures and boxes. And, when the digital age started coming around, it was like, hey, what are you going to do with all this stuff? Like, you got to do something with it, because we would sit in there and go through images and be like, wow, this is really cool. But we would be the only ones to be able to see it. And when the internet kind of came along, it became a thing like, hey, like, I think like this is the opportunity to take this to the next level kind of thing. So we would nag him as friends to just be like, hey, do something with this. And so when, he started scanning, it just became like, it was like, oh, cool, you're finally starting to do it. But then it was like, okay, you're still scanning. And this is like years later. And so, like to see him, put the time and effort into doing it really showed his passion and dedication for it. And it really allowed us to simplify the process of doing things now, because we have a library of stuff and it's just so much easier to hone in. Now, granted, like it's not that easy. I mean, 10,000 photos, they're not all labeled and stuff. So there's still a lot of digging and, but to categorize some of it and kind of get a grasp on it was like a really catalyst in far as moving us forward and being able to do stuff with it now in 2021.
So our first site actually went up in 2005, and that was around the time when I had maybe a few hundred images scanned, and it was live for maybe 5-6 years, and then we took it down, and then we relaunched it a few years later, and I began to kind of put the images online. But like Ross was saying, all the images you can pull up by keywords, they're tagged, but it's still such a large group of images. Like if you were to type in Black business, you're talking about 1,000 photos. If you type in jazz, you're talking about hundreds of photos. If you type in sports, and so many of them aren't. So I encourage anybody that's here, if you know any elders, if you know anyone from this time period, anyone that's knowledgeable about these things, please reach out, set up an ID session, either virtually or in person, and help us kind of get to the bottom of who a lot of these people are, and add some of this information to the photos.
Tell us a little bit more in detail what an ID session's like.
So ID session is, for instance, we did a few at the Waxter Center, and I go in with a projector, a laptop, and my hard drive. I'll project some images up, kind of survey the room, see maybe where everyone's from, what their professions were, what they're into, and I just kind of start pulling up stuff by keyword, and then it becomes a discussion. And there's always, even if I've had ID sessions with from 1 to maybe 15 or 20 people, and even with one person, we've always gotten some kind of ID and some kind of information on who people are. So let's say you got a group of folks, some friends who are around this time period. You can meet up with me on Zoom. I'll share my screen. I'll pull up photos from the archive, and we kind of just take like I said, we kind of just take that trip down memory lane, and just kind of flip through stuff for an hour or two, and just see what we can find. Each one is kind of an adventure. You never know what you're gonna get. You never know what photo. Even after looking at these photos time and time again, you look at a photo, and the more you look at it, you're gonna see something in the background. You're gonna see a guy in the window, or some people behind the fence, or somebody's reflection, or it's just kind of endless. But even after looking at these images so much, I'm still constantly running across images that I'm like, wow, I haven't searched this tagged for a while, or I haven't kind of dug into this corner of the archive. So it's just constantly, it's such an ongoing process.
Wow. I love this piece here. I can't help but call it a piece because I'm always looking at art.
Oh,
But
yeah.
one of the things that is familiar to me, first of all, I almost feel like I know the neighborhood of this house based on that mirror and the stairs that
What
are
neighborhood are you
in
thinking?
it. I'm thinking it's northwest Baltimore, maybe like Park Heights,
My first thought
Belvedere area,
was like Liberty Heights. That's what
Liberty Heights,
like Forest Park
Northwest.
area.
Yeah.
And this is another
Northwest.
example. This is another example of them kind of posed in the centerpiece of the room, which is the bookshelf. And you see like they're reading Porgy and Bess, but the same way that kind of folks were centered around pianos in some photos, they're definitely avid readers. You know, like you can see there, because back then this is your like the books were your internet. That was how you traveled. You know, that was how you got information.
And encyclopedias meant you had a little bit of status. And I see some encyclopedias on that top shelf over there.
Definitely.
Installed it that I thought that some of them were law books. Because I was like, were they attorneys? I like feel like a couple of them look like those, like the still same law books that people still use. But and I didn't even notice until today that they were reading this Porgy and Bess book. It's frozen, a moment frozen in time. It's a time capsule. It's really cool. Also, I want.
And it's cool how that mirror is, and you can see in the other room.
Yeah,
you see in the
for
other
sure.
room out of the window. I mean, yeah, it's really powerful.
Yeah. I mean, this is something that I always point out to people if they
White
come into
and
this space
colored.
is the swimming pool schedule.
I didn't notice that before.
Because it literally shows back then the days that Black people could swim, the days that
Mondays
White
whites,
people could swim, literally.
Tuesdays colored, Wednesdays whites.
And Webster, can you explain what you were telling me about how like this is like a photo of?
So this is an image. The graphic designer at the Afro was a guy by the name of Thomas Stockett, and
I knew him.
You knew
wow.
Stockett?
Yes.
And he was
I knew his daughter.
an amazing artist. Everything from my dad used to say he was the first Photoshop. He used to say if your shoe was untied, he could tie it.
He did the Maryland stamp with the bird on it.
Yeah, and he was the graphic designer. So this is an image. This is a rephotograph of an image, and you can kind of see where he drew over top of the letters to kind of saturate them, and how he kind of lined out the back of the screen. A lot of the images that went in the newspaper had to be drawn on to kind of make them have heavy contrast and heavy lines. Otherwise, the details weren't going to show up in the paper, because you're talking less than, I don't know if it was 30 dots per inch or what it was back then, but you really weren't going to get that kind of clarity you got from an image. So every image that went in the newspaper, there's a version of it that Thomas Stockett actually had drawn. He's actually an amazing political cartoonist too. Mm-hmm. If you're into political cartoons or just artwork in general, definitely look up Thomas Stockett and look up his political cartoons. There's a few of them on our Instagram. So I see a question.
Yeah, David Warnock asked if you specifically have ever written about your experiences or any interactions with the project.
So I see. So I think I see two for him. One, I think did my grandfather ever write about his reflections on various images, and he might have, but I haven't seen the writings. I feel like it's one of those like pictures speak 1,000 words things. Like he was kind of telling you how he felt by what he took. Another I think question from Warnock said, in addition to the family photos, he had a lot of works focused on social change. Has there ever been a show of those? And up until this point, all of the shows previously, with the exception of one where I kind of did all street scenes, were a mix of the photographs. So it was some celebrities, some sports, some social, some politics, because I always wanted to show the depth and the variety of the things and kind of the different styles that he shot. And this is one of the first shows where we kind of wanted to zero in on a theme and kind of have a conversation around one specific topic. So eventually, I feel like there's so many themes to kind of run through, from music to sports to politics, like I say, kind of civil rights, that, you know, the list is like,
It's a curator's dream.
yeah, the
I mean,
list
it's
is
like
the list
it's like
is vast.
so
It
much.
made my job so much easier.
Yeah.
How did y'all come up with the title for the show? Because that was all y'all, and it's beautiful. But I'm curious.
I left that to Ross, and he gave me a couple suggestions, and I think we both agreed on the Roots Need Water. I don't know if the other one. I'm not gonna say one of them that Ross was thinking about.
He might use the
We played with many theme names, but I think we had a concept for the show a little bit.
With one of the names. If anybody has any
What you
questions,
say?
drop them in the chat.
What are you saying, Ross?
No, I was saying once we kind of came up with the actual theme of the show, it made it easier to name it. I mean, we didn't try and go backwards and start the theme and then fill in the blanks. We kind of went for the content first, and then, you know, the naming of it was kind of the last part, you know, of it. And then we just kind of, you know, I just threw out some ideas, and that one, it resonated with us the most. And you know, Roots Need Water. Family, the idea of water brings life, and to just bring it all together, it kind of made sense for the show. So we ran with that.
Nice. Let me add, excuse me. What's your selection process for deciding what you want to print for limited edition in the dark room versus what you want to have digitally print? If I say digitally.
So
right.
what I was running into years ago was, with photographs is tough, because if you have a painting, you got that painting, you know it's the one, you know it's the painting, everything else is a print. With photographs, a lot of collectors are worried about photographs kind of appreciating with value, because a lot of times people would do multiple editions with different sizes. And one thing I kind of was running into at the beginning was I was trying to keep, I was pricing people out of art, and the people who could afford it didn't want it, and the people who wanted it couldn't afford it. And so because there's so many images, I kind of wanted to, like, at first people were like, you can't put these images online, people. And I at a certain point, it's like, you have to sacrifice a few hundred images out of 1,000 and make them open editions and make them affordable for people who just, they want the image, they like the image. They're not necessarily worried about if it's going to appreciate with value. They're not really getting it as a collector, even though it will hold value.
Nice.
But what I tried to do with the silver gelatin prints now is, any digital print now won't be a limited edition. You'll know it's a limited edition when it's a silver gelatin print. And I won't be printing anything that I print in the silver gelatin print, most likely, with the exception of maybe one or two in that show, will strictly be limited and will only be printed wet in the dark room. And from now on, all of the limited editions will be silver gelatin prints.
Nice. But I'm asking, well, I guess that's not as important of a question, really. What are the next steps is a better question for the project, the I. Henry Photo Project. And then we have another question, I think, from Dr. Lowry Sims. That's what we want to get to.
So continuing on the ID process, we're also working on a book right now with a ton of different collaborators. I feel like the next step is the book, and getting the book out there and really trying to take the work national via the book and via a show that travels with the book. But I feel like, and actually Leslie dropped the sign so me, she, you know, with
Dr. Leslie King Hammond, by the way.
Yeah, I wanted to
for the rest of y'all who don't know who Leslie is.
I wanted to travel with a show a while back, and she was saying you can travel with the show, but the book is going to open doors. You know, the book is going to be something where if you do a show, a lot of people aren't going to be able to get a piece. They're not going to get a print, but everyone will get the book, and that will live on people's coffee tables, live with people's houses. It'll live in academia. It'll live in colleges. It'll live in school libraries. And like even earlier today, I was looking at something, a post at D. Watkins, and someone was saying that the cook-up was required reading for like their 10th grader, you know, and like that's the kind of thing that's important. Is like actually seeing it lives with people, and it kind of allows people to see a variety of images and kind of show the depth like some of these other shows, especially with this first book that'll have a wide range of images.
Wow. Speaking of books, Dr. Lowry Sims, who's an author, a major author in the art and history world, she had a question that is just disappeared off my screen. Girl, thank you. Here it is. Do you record your ID sessions? They would be an important oral history. It's also
so yes. So before the pandemic kind of shut everything down, we had some students that were we were recording audio, and we were also documenting them with photographs. And we haven't videotaped any of the sessions yet, but moving forward, everything will be recorded and kind of held on to have that information to actually really go hand in hand with the images. We were actually planning a show where the show was going to be comprised of all of the images that we ID'd, as well as the sound bites and the photos of the people who identified the images. So you'd actually be able to look at a photo and hear the audio of the person kind of it clicking and them being able to identify the photo.
Got it. And we have another question that we have here from Alex Bell for both of you. I'm going to go to you first, Rasan. What's next for Rasan?
What's next for me? For me, I would say just continue to build upon what we've already started. And I think that now that we've actually been through this process of us bringing a new medium to light, I think it's a good starting point for us to build upon and just do something new, because like I said, we are now able to, because of his archival process, and we have access to this stuff, we're able to put together shows and really hone in on the pieces more. One thing I wanted to stay away from was Irving had mentioned earlier how, normally in his shows, it'll be a lot of, like some jazz and some sports, and it was just all over the place, and really wanted to hone in and make a more specific show. And I think that now we're able to do that. And so now we have so many more things that we want to bring to light. And I think that's the next step for us, besides a book itself.
Yeah.
Published,
I think you might be muted, Jeff.
He froze. Jeff?
Yeah, we lost you for a second. We lost you
All
for
right,
a
cool.
second.
So you didn't hear me cussing just now when I saw my internet went out. So for you, brother Irving Webster Phillips.
Really just trying to get back into these ID sessions and get the students back involved with the process. And just continuously, it's just ongoing, just continuously, just kind of keep building, keep gathering the information, keep telling the story, try to get as many eyes on the photos as possible through whatever outlets we can, and really encouraging people to spread the word and to get involved with the process. Everyone has, not everyone, but most people have an elder in their family that through ID session can help in this process. And also encouraging people, same way I'm really trying to encourage people to print, get a scanner, archive your family's photos. There's usually an aunt or uncle that's like kind of the gay people and the historian of the family. They have the images, and you may be able to see them when you go over their house, but digitize them so everyone can have a copy, so everyone can kind of look through them with their family. And so there's backup, so there's everyone's able to view these images. If you have negatives, I actually provide a service of scanning negatives and slides for folks. I scanned a few thousand of Rasan's fathers and grandfathers, grandparents, slides of their vacations and just kind of life over the years. And if you don't want to grab a scanner yourself, come to me or go to a service where you can actually take a lot of these images and make positives out of them, or a lot of these negatives, and digitize them and actually have something to look at. A lot of times with film negatives, there's not always a lot of prints to go along with the negatives. So a lot of times, especially with 35 millimeters, and really any photos, most folks don't have an actual print of all the images. So to get a digital version of these images and kind of have those to kind of gather your family's history and to pass that on through generations, because a lot of times it gets lost, ends up, in a photo album on someone's shelf, on someone's coffee table, or someone's closet, and it's be able to really pass that along and have that solidified for generations to come. Everyone has a family history,
Cool.
somehow
Cool.
documented.
Cool. One last thing I want to make sure that I get out before we roll out here, because we got maybe a minute or a second or two to go. So your granddad worked for the Afro-American, and I guess he was one of very few that looked like him who worked for, no, that's not true, because Afro-American is a black newspaper. That's a separate thing. But your dad was the very first black photographer at the Baltimore Sun newspaper. Is that correct?
Yeah.
And just wanted to make sure I got that out there.
Yeah, he worked for the Sun for 23 years, and he came back from Vietnam and kind of worked for the Afro, I think maybe for a little bit, but then jumped straight into the Sun papers, and then like you say, did that for over 2 decades. Okay. It was always interesting going on jobs with him, learning how to kind of feel the job, learning how to get an overall shot, learning how to get the people in the room, looking at the sheet from the editor, and making sure you get those 5 people that the editor told you to get, making sure you were in and out, and that you came back with a photo that was going to come out, because you weren't able to see it on the back of the screen. So learning how to bracket, learning how to make sure you came out with something, and really just learning how to tell a story through the photos. Nice.
And Rasan has a videography service as well. I want to just get that out there, and let you finish, Terry.
Well, I appreciate y'all spending this, I think it's Wednesday night with us. Thank you for your time. Thank you, Rasan and Webster, for sharing this project with us. I appreciate you both. Thank you, Jeffrey. Thank you, Cara, for being behind the scenes. And y'all have until Saturday. We have open hours from 12 to 4 at the gallery. If you would like to come by, you don't feel comfortable coming during open hours, I'll be there pretty much throughout the day tomorrow and Friday. You can direct message me on the Connect+Collect Instagram or email me at terry@bmr.com. But it's a great show. Thank you guys so much.
Thanks,
and I want to